Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we go over the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Maté. And really, the hard part is over, Katie. We've gone through the clips. We've assembled them. We don't have to watch the shows anymore. We can just watch the best of the shows, the clips.
Yeah, right. Or the worst.
We've done the hard work. Now it's time for the gravy train.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also, speaking of the gravy train or getting beyond the hard work and party time, we have a party for you. We got a party for you. It's called the 11 a.m. EST after party, and that's at Callin, and the link is in the description, and that's where we take your calls and your comments and your feedback to the news. And it's a beautiful thing. And everyone, please, if you're appreciative of this show, there's a way to do that, to show your appreciation. That is by pressing the thumbs up, the like. Yeah.
Give us those endorphins. Give us those like endorphins, please. We beg you. Yes.
Please do.
And also help more people see the show. That's really what doing that act of kindness is for.
Yep. So, shall we go to the clips now that we've appealed to your kinder angels?
Let's hit it. So, look, a lot happened this week, including Congress voting to break a major labor action, but all that pales in comparison when Donald Trump says something or meets with somebody. So, of course, once again, Donald Trump dominated the news this week with his demands to suspend the Constitution and his dinner with anti-Semites and white supremacists and incels. So let's hit the Chuckster.
Good Sunday morning. Donald Trump launched his third bid for the White House just 19 days ago, believe it or not. And already his campaign and the Republican Party are being tested as he refuses to disavow the anti-Semitic and racist part of the party that he has aligned himself with for years now. Trump has been endorsed by just a single Republican senator for this third bid, Alabama's Tommy Tuberville. On the House side, his supporters include people like Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Paul Gosar. His former Vice President, Mike Pence, former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, not only they are not endorsing Trump, they're all making moves to run against him in the primaries. And though he announced his 2024 campaign so early as a way to complicate several federal criminal investigations into him, this week a federal appeals court fast-tracked the Mar-a-Lago investigation, ending an outside review of classified documents the FBI had seized from his home and freeing the Justice Department and the new special counsel to use them in its criminal investigation. So now,
when the Mueller report came up completely empty and Mueller had that meltdown before Congress where he didn't even know the details of his own investigation, I genuinely naively thought that Mueller time and Russia mania was over, right? Like, what more could they do with that? Well, boy, was I wrong. And I guess after Trump lost in 2020 and launched that insane Stop the Steal madness and caused a riot on Capitol Hill, I also kind of thought, like, wow, okay, this guy's got to be done now. But boy, oh boy, he just does not go away.
Yeah, you basically what you're saying is that you thought it was going to be stop Mueller time.
That's right. I thought it was going to be done with Mueller time and then done with Trump time after he caused a riot when he lost the election. He lost the election and he caused a riot. It's still, he will not go away. And a big part of that is the media just won't let him go away either. They love this guy.
That was a little reference, by the way, to Stop Hammer Time.
I got it. It was
okay. You did. I just want to make sure because it was so great. I thought it deserved some, instantaneous acknowledgement and laughter. I was really surprised you didn't break into stitches. Yeah. And guys, if you're watching this, and that goes for you, Aaron and Wilson, make sure you retweet this tweet.
Oh, done and done.
Yeah.
Done and done.
We got to spread the gospel.
Now, Trump is testing the limits of his ability to be a relevant political figure. And he's testing the limits of the Republican Party as he yet again embraces this extremism and anti-Semitism. After the rapper Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, lost lucrative partnerships with Adidas and others because of an anti-Semitic tirade, Donald Trump still welcomed him to Mar-a-Lago for a pre-Thanksgiving dinner. And Kanye brought along Nick Fuentes, a prominent white supremacist.
That's not fair, Chuck. Trump just wanted to help out Kanye.
Yeah, a black man, as he pointed out, a black man in distress.
He said,
no, not a black man. Someone who happens to be black.
yeah, someone like who needed help, who happens to be black.
Yeah.
That's what those are Trump's words.
Yeah.
He was just trying to be a good friend. We should try some of that.
Yeah, he was trying to call him in, not call him out.
Exactly.
Holocaust denier and anti-Semite. Trump has claimed not to know who Fuentes was, but he's not yet disavowed either Fuentes or Ye. Instead, Trump recorded a video expressing solidarity with the mob that attacked the Capitol on January 6th. He did that earlier this week. And then on Saturday, seemingly out of nowhere, called for the suspension of the Constitution as yet another attempt to overturn the 2020 election. Trump has been politically underestimated before with these antics, and in the end, the party has stood by him when he's been their nominee. But the backlash this time is growing.
By the way, I feel like they're not giving Nick Fuentes full biography when they say he's a Holocaust denier. He's also a faux incel, as we covered last week.
That's right. Yeah, you pointed this out that he was pretending to be an incel.
Yes, because he kissed a girl once, and he got very frazzled by this accusation, and he was really grasping at straws, trying to defend himself as an involuntary celibate. That's what incel stands for. But he really was like being creative with the truth. He was like, "Well, I'm involuntary. I didn't choose to be born." That's not that you don't get to apply involuntary to things besides the celibacy stuff. So, yeah,
very bizarre. Very bizarre. Well, when Trump is accused of anti-Semitism, who better to interview as the authority on anti-Semitism than the longtime Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu,
BB,
who occupies an entire population of people and still pretends as if he has some sort of credibility to speak about issues of human rights, and
is pushing his memoir. By the way,
is hawking his new memoir. Yeah. So here he is. We're not going to play too much of this, but let's play.
Oh, right, because we're going to do a deep dive into this for our Thursday Throwdown. Our Thursday Throwdown, which you can access if you are Substack subscribers at usefulidiots.substack.com, and make sure that you subscribe to that so you don't lose out on these really great deep dives. But we're going to be responding to not just, of course, this one, but other clips. Yeah.
Directly,
Jews and everyone else.
You've got a unique relationship with former President Trump. He has consistently flirted with some really fringe characters that spout this anti-Semitic behavior, that preach white supremacy and white nationalism, things like that. And he doesn't denounce it. He is yet to denounce Kanye West at all. He's yet to denounce being with a white supremacist a few days ago. Why does he have this difficulty, do you think?
I don't know. First, let me say that President Trump did great things for Israel. He recognized Jerusalem as our capital, long overdue since King David proclaimed it as such 3,000 years ago. He moved the American embassy there. He recognized our sovereignty in the Golan Heights. He got out of what I believe is the disastrous Iran deal that would have paved Iran's path with gold, hundreds of billions of dollars of sanctions relief towards a nuclear arsenal. So he's done.
I mean, look, the amount of falsehoods in one short line is off the charts. So he says Trump recognized our sovereignty over the Golan Heights. What he means by that is Trump recognized Israel's theft of the Golan Heights from Syria, which it took back in 1967 and has occupied ever since. And yeah, Trump, because he was in the pocket of far-right billionaires like Sheldon Adelson, ticked off a whole wish list of anti-Palestinian goals, including moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, which Sheldon Adelson gave Trump $20 million for. That's pretty much, that was the quid pro quo that Maggie Haberman recently revealed.
Which
and by the way,
that was our Republican suck last week.
Yeah, and by the way, again, this was all happening after 6 years of nonstop mania over Trump's potential collusion on behalf of a foreign power. And the possible financial interest involved of him getting money from Russian oligarchs. Well, this revelation comes out that an American oligarch basically gave Trump's super PAC $20 million to move a U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Hugely consequential move. and the media reaction is meh.
Right.
It's not, that's
not the Trump scandal we're interested in.
No. And then of course Netanyahu hates the Iran nuclear deal because it allowed Iran to access its own money that was stolen from it decades ago. And that's why he talks about billions of dollars paved with gold that Iran is somehow getting magically from the US. No, Iran was basically allowed the privilege of accessing its own money. And to people like Netanyahu and Sheldon Adelson, that's an intolerable act.
Right.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Shelley.
All these great things, and I appreciate it, and I remain appreciative. On this matter, on Kanye West and that other unacceptable guest, I think it's not merely unacceptable, it's just wrong. And I hope he sees his way to staying out of it and condemning it.
Well, the funny thing is that Netanyahu and Trump are both doing the same PR for Trump, because Trump himself pointed out how good he was to the Jews by moving the embassy.
Exactly right. Netanyahu just wants Trump to get back to, just passionately supporting his government's occupation and dispossession of Palestinians, and stop meeting with anti-Semites for dinner. But the rest of everything else Trump does is not only fine, but it's great, and it's all it's all a big gift to people like Netanyahu.
All right. Next clip.
Well, so there's one more. So we're gonna do one more clip from this interview because it's fun. This is something that Chuck says to Putin. That is that Chuck says to Netanyahu, and it just again, going back to what we're just talking about, like, you have here an actual case of Trump collusion with a foreign power, but because Russia is still so much on the minds of people like Chuck Todd, he can't help but throw Russia into the mix when really there's no tie. So here's Chuck Todd talking to Netanyahu.
Are you at all concerned, though, that if your government gets what you want, you overlook whether it's Vladimir Putin, who's also an anti-Semite, or a Donald Trump? I mean, what is the line for you?
So Chuck just throws in there the assertion that Vladimir Putin is an anti-Semite.
Yeah. Any evidence presented?
Which I haven't heard before. If you look at actually Putin's government, he's actually very close with Israel. So much so that Russia basically lets Israel bomb Syria, which is a close ally of Russia. But Israel wants to bomb Syria because it wants to basically keep Syria crushed and unable to help the resistance factions against Israel, and it also wants to weaken Syria because Syria is a key ally of Iran. So Israel constantly bombs Syria. It constantly bombs Iranian tankers that are bringing fuel over to Syria, even though Syria is in the midst of a huge fuel crisis, in part because of U.S. sanctions, and the U.S. is occupying the oil-rich regions of Syria. And Russia lets Israel do that. Russia, if it wanted to, could stop that. It could basically let Syria use its air defenses that are supplied by Russia, but it doesn't. So Russia's actually given Israel the green light, essentially, to bomb Syria.
Right,
and that's because Israel's prioritized its relationship with Russia over its relationship with Syria. And so this idea that Putin is somehow an anti-Semite or not friendly to Israel is just not true.
Right. But of course, we do want to push back on the idea that being friendly to Israel means you're not an anti-Semite, or being unfriendly to Israel means you're an anti-Semite.
Absolutely. Yes, it's true. It's true. Like it's true. Being nice to Israel doesn't mean you're not an anti-Semite,
but he doesn't present any evidence of Putin's being an anti-Semite.
No.
Right. By the way, I just had a very upsetting alert looking at the comments, which is that we have 957 people watching and 73 likes. Now, Aaron, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to continue until we get the likes up. I want to see 500 likes. Go.
Yeah, that is a very low ratio, 73.
Katie, you might not be refreshed because I see 402.
Okay, so let's get it up to 500. And I'm sorry, guys, do not put misinformation in the chat or disinformation. Which one is it?
Oh, I see 517. It's
malinformation
because that's very bad.
Thank you very much. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. All right. Do we have but again, yes. I think it would behoove all of us when discussing anti-Semitism, which is serious, but also is frequently weaponized and misrepresented. It would behoove us all to, when accusing people of anti-Semitism, have a teeny bit of evidence.
Yes, and that evidence is usually lacking on
Right.
On Meet the Press. But that's why
Right.
we're here. That's why we're here to watch.
But you know what? To be fair, Putin, as we all know, is very Hitlerian.
Right, of course. Yes, he's constantly
People love
compared to
saying
Hitler.
that.
So maybe that's what Chuck's talking about. He just hears Trump. He just hears Putin being compared to Hitler enough,
Right.
or he just feels okay with just throwing that out there now,
Right.
because Putin basically is Hitler according to conventional wisdom. All right. Well, look, this didn't get very much attention this week on the Sunday news shows, because who cares about a national labor dispute where Congress is voting to break a strike? Yeah, whatever.
NBD, no big
NBD.
deal at all. Yeah.
But it did get some attention. So a few days after Congress voted to basically impose a deal on rail workers, a deal that they had rejected, Senator Sherrod Brown, who's considered to be pro-labor, was on CNN, and he was asked about why he voted to impose this deal on workers when so many workers had rejected it.
The Senate passed legislation this week to avert a potentially devastating strike by railway workers. A push to include workers' key demand for 7 days of paid sick leave. That failed. Here's what one union member told CNN. Take a listen.
We have a pro-labor president who loves to, pat himself on the back for that. And when the going got tough, he turned his back on the people he's supposed to be looking out for. Joe Biden forced a contract on our unionized workers who voted against it.
Now, you, Senator, you voted to ask.
By the way, I think the fact that CNN aired the voice of a worker, a union member, means they're going to have to compensate with 700 hours of
Right.
the Trump mania, because that's unacceptable.
I see, right. To bury it. They have to bury it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a rare sighting. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a very rare sighting.
Had the 7 days of paid leave, but after that amendment failed, you still voted for the final deal. How do you explain this to a union worker like Reese? It doesn't seem like Democrats were truly standing up with all of their force against these billion-dollar rail companies.
Yeah, Sherrod.
Yeah, I mean, we have every Democrat but one voted for the sick pay days, the 7 sick days.
Who was that Democrat? Not hard to figure out. It was, of course, Joe Manchin.
JM. Yeah.
Oh, of course he did.
Only 6 Republicans that we couldn't get to 60 votes. I take a backseat to nobody in fighting for workers and fighting for union members and non-union members too. But the issue here is we have to keep the economy going. I'm going to go back and I'm working with staff, working with leader's office, working with the White House on how do we help these workers to make sure eventually they get these sick days. But we also know if there had been a strike, that literally hundreds of thousands, maybe more workers would have been out of work for a lengthy period of time.
So maybe you should have pressured the business owners, the corporate people on top. It's always the workers' fault, right? It's never, they should concede to their demands. It's always the people who are to blame are the ones who are fighting for their livelihoods. Disgusting.
Yes, and that's the point. Like the strike is the workers' main form of leverage.
Right.
And so once you take that away and say, well, sorry, if you exert your leverage, then the economy will shut down. So we're going to override you. Then you're basically saying that there's no point in you being organized, an organized labor force, because when you actually organize to do the one thing you can do to improve your rights, we're going to take that away from you. And so here he is bragging about what a pro-labor lawmaker he is. And it's true. He's way better than other lawmakers on these issues historically. But he's justifying taking away the workers' main form of leverage. And that was the problem, is once Biden and the congressional leaders decided that they would not let this strike happen because they said we have to protect the economy, then they basically threw the workers under the bus. And so whatever they do in that context, it's just not going to help them.
Awful. Jesus Christ.
We have to look at the whole economy, but I will never lose my focus on those workers who didn't get as good a deal as we'd like to have had. But again, almost every Republican voted no. We're continuing to try to work bipartisanly with them and with the White House to fix this.
I mean, it's absolutely
Not
true.
good
The
enough.
Republicans of course, Republicans sold them out.
Right.
No
Sorry.
doubt about that. But it was the decision of Union Joe Biden, to take away the main leverage that they had. And yes, after that, they tried to give the workers, 7 sick days, and it was Republicans who defeated that. But it was Democrats who put themselves in that position to begin with by basically not letting a strike happen.
Right. Disgusting.
So another Democrat who was asked about this was Catherine Clark, who's the incoming House Democratic whip. And she was asked about the rail vote on Meet the Press.
Right. And this was I think the only time that Meet the Press decided it would be relevant to bring this up.
Yes, absolutely.
Together as a team is that we reach across our Democratic caucus, put people together with solutions. And the strength of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives is that we are diverse, and we know that that gives us a great strength.
So here she
and
is,
that
just
coming
with
together
platitudes,
gives us our power.
platitudes.
Do you have a what's a way that the average House member, Democratic House member, is going to see a change between how Pelosi and Hoyer ran things versus how you and Hakeem Jeffries are going to run things?
Because this is the new class.
Replacing one of the
Pelosi.
biggest changes is going to be that we are coming into this in the minority, but the commitment that we have had to the people of this country, to workers, to women, to the climate is going to continue on. And one of the things that the incredible leadership team that is transitioning out of leadership has shown us is how to lead by putting the American people first. But they've also given us a model to become our own leaders. And let me tell you what it means to me, coming in as a different generation. I remember my middle child waking up with nightmares over concern around climate change. I've had my family at a movie theater when the movie stopped, my children immediately felt there must be a shooter in the theater with us.
All right, you got to explain how movies work to your kids. No one should be afraid when a movie stops that there's a shooter. You're muted, Aaron.
If you're trying to sound relatable, this is bottom of the barrel stuff. This is if you're I'm sure there's some course they take on how to sound like the average Joe and how to relate to the average person. But this is your kid waking up from a nightmare on climate change. I don't know.
That part I find more believable than the being afraid when a movie ends. Unless it's a really poorly done movie and the end doesn't feel like an end, that's possible. Anyway.
So you're saying a filmmaking class is
really
helpful.
Is needed,
okay.
Yeah.
These are the type of experiences that we are going to bring as we continue to push to meet this moment of challenge for the American people with progress.
I want to ask about something that happened this week, the vote to avert the railroad strike. Some unions were not happy with Democrats on this one. I want to read for you one quote from the Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the Teamsters Union. Clark Ballou said this: "You can damn well believe our members will remember which politicians supported a basic common courtesy of a sick day when they go to the ballot box." Are you comfortable with the fact that it's the Democrats that basically passed a bill here that prevented the addition of more sick days to this agreement?
It is a national shame that we do not have paid sick leave in this country as
Dodge.
a national policy for every single worker, including the railroad workers. And that's why Democrats, along with President Biden, made sure that that was included in the American Rescue Plan, so people could have a chance to recover from COVID and other illness.
It didn't get passed, though.
While not having to make the decision. And then we went on in Build Back Better. And we have met absolute resistance from the GOP.
Total dodge,
But our
just blaming
commitment is not to
Republicans.
back down from this issue, but to continue to press. It is good for workers and it is good for the economy.
When it
So that's
it.
all you have to do. Just blame Republicans. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. He did correct her in saying that, well, the
Right.
provisions you fought for didn't get passed before in the American Rescue Plan. Now we're talking about this measure where you voted to break a strike, basically, or to avoid a strike. And that's the only question that that Chuck asked about that. But at least he asked. I mean, you know, in other times, perhaps this issue of a major labor action crushed by Democrats wouldn't even come up.
Disgusting.
And that was a total dodge on her part. Speaking of which, there's also a dodge when she gets asked about Democrats' ties to FTX, that crypto company that recently tanked. So here is Catherine Clark being asked about that.
I'm going to ask you about FTX, the sort of the fallen FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried. He's given nearly $40 million to Democratic causes over the last campaign cycle. I believe $6 million went to the House Majority PAC, another $1 million to the Senate side of things. Do you think the Democratic Party got itself too tied up with the crypto industry in general?
You know, FTX is a cautionary tale for all of us who are looking at how do we regulate crypto? How do we make sure that we are embracing what might be new technologies and currencies, but also making sure that consumers have accountability and transparency. And let me remind you that it is the Democrats who make sure that we are pushing laws to get dark money out of our politics so that people can see.
Chuck should be like, let me remind you that I asked you about the Democrats receiving money from this scam company.
And also the Democrats, as we've covered before, like Jim Zogby and others, try to put through rules for the Democrats that they wouldn't take dark money, and they voted against it.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Which he may want to remind her of, but he may not know that, honestly.
Again, Democrats are blessed, though, in that they have such corrupt opponents to the Republicans, in which there's no trace of any kind of like decency whatsoever. So they can always point the fact that Republicans are worse. And often, I mean, unless you're talking about what issues of like, you know, invading other countries and sanctioning them, then pretty much everyone is on the same page. But they can always point the fact that Republicans are worse, and you know, they're often right. But yeah, she's not answering the question at all.
No,
which is about them specifically taking money from the scam company FTX.
Right. She's good at the dodge.
She's very good at the dodge. So she'll be a great Democratic leader.
Exactly.
It's a new generation. She was talking before about the new generation, like all the new skills and like the path that the old leaders have laid for the new generation. Well, they've certainly imparted the art of the dodge and not answering questions directly.
Yeah. It's beautiful. That's transgenerational.
Yeah.
It's a tradition that they're upholding.
Someone in the chat jokes Dogecoin, that Democrats should mint a Dogecoin. That's good. It's very good. All right. So, okay, that's enough of Catherine Clark. But there's another new Democratic leader, and that is Hakeem Jeffries, who's just recently been voted to be the incoming House Democratic leader, replacing Nancy Pelosi. And here he is on ABC's This Week.
Pretty stinging welcome from Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell on Thursday. He took to the Senate floor and said this.
The newly elected incoming leader of House Democrats is a past election denier who basically said the 2016 election was, quote, illegitimate and suggested that we had a, quote, fake president.
Suggesting equivalence there with Donald Trump. What's your response?
Well, it's unfortunate that Republicans have chosen to focus on me. House Democrats are going to focus on solving problems for the American people.
But you did say that history will never accept Donald Trump as a legitimate president, and the Republicans are making quite a big issue out of that. What is your response?
Well, here's the Republican playbook. Facts don't matter. Hypocrisy is not a constraint to their behavior. And in many cases, they believe that shamelessness is a superpower. My view of the situation has been pretty clear. I supported the certification of Donald Trump's election. I attended his inauguration, even though there were many constituents and others across the country pushing me and others to do otherwise, and found ways to work with the Trump administration, being the lead Democrat in negotiating historic criminal justice reform. That track record speaks for itself. At the same time, I will never hesitate in criticizing the former president. I think I'm in good company there throughout the world.
So, Mitch McConnell, I hate to acknowledge, is making a fair point, which is that Hakeem Jeffries is an election denier. He did say that Trump was an illegitimate, a fake president, and that Trump's election was illegitimate because of alleged Russian interference. And Hakeem Jeffries says, well, unlike Trump, I did accept the certification of the election. I even attended Trump's inauguration. And that's true. But, the point I've tried to make is that unlike Trump's election denialism, which was just very crude, disorganized, and chaotic, Democrats did it in a much more artful way. They got behind a special counsel to basically do the same thing that Trump tried to do in 2020, which was undermine the result of the election when they got Robert Mueller to invent a conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton paid for to invent, which is that Trump was a Russian agent. So, yeah, Democrats did officially recognize the results of the election. They just very skillfully did everything they could to undermine it with a special counsel investigation and years of leaks designed to make Trump look like a Russian agent.
Right. They were much more couth about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how Hakeem Jeffries says that, Democrats are or Republicans are, it's the classic Republican playbook. This is the classic Russiagate playbook, which is basically just to deflect and accuse other people of acts that you carry out yourself. And I think we have the tweet here from Hakeem Jeffries just showing his shifting stances. If we have that, Wilson. Here it is. So this is from 2018. He says, the more we learn about 2016 election, the more illegitimate it becomes. America deserves to know whether we have a fake president in the Oval Office. # Russian interference. And then, after 2020, Hakeem Jeffries tweets this: we will never bend the knee to the election deniers who poison our democracy. So that's just an example of how much more sophisticated the Democrats' election denial was. And really, it was there's a lot of similarities. So there's a lot of similarities.
Indeed. And by the way, thank you, Kyle Wool, for this. Power concedes nothing without demand. Wildcat shut it down. That's a strike without the unions, without the official okay from the unions. Yeah. And also want to thank Wadeworth for their generous donation in the super chat form.
We asked our guest last week about the prospect of a wildcat strike,
right?
And I don't think they were very optimistic about that happening. Right. To do that is a really, really big deal,
right?
And you're asking people to take a huge risk, and some people are talking about that.
Yeah,
I think it's a case where it would need to be something that just goes beyond the rail workers. There needs to be more people having their back, because if you just ask one sector to do a wildcat strike on their own, that could just only hurt them.
Right.
That's my understanding, but yeah.
Maybe, yeah. Up in the air. It's unclear. Who knows? Yeah.
All right. Well, that's enough talking about, issues like unions and labor rights. Let's get back to the important stuff, which is Donald Trump. So here is Congressmember Mike Turner, who's the incoming chair of the House Intelligence Committee. He was asked about Trump's recent call for terminating the Constitution as he still doubles down on his stop the steal fantasy.
On the big steal, the big lie. Yeah.
The big lie. Yes. Yes.
A basic question, but all elected leaders swear to uphold the Constitution. Does calling for its suspension, is that disqualifying for a presidential candidate?
It's certainly not consistent
I'm
with
asking
the,
the question.
I do. It's certainly not consistent with the oath that we all take.
So yesterday, the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, the standard bearer for your party, posted on Truth Social, and we know he lost the 2020 election, but continues to claim he did not. A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Should the standard bearer for the Republican Party, the frontrunner for the nomination for the presidency for your party in 2024, say this?
Well, I first of all, I vehemently disagree with the statement that Trump has made. Trump has made, 1,000 statements in which I disagree. There is a political process that has to go forward before anybody
Constitutional conservatives are pretty clear about where they value the Constitution.
Right, exactly. But
is there any scenario with suspending the Constitution?
You do get to pick the questions, but I do get to pick my answer.
I know. I'm trying to get you to answer the question I'm asking.
There
to be
is
fair,
a political
he's
process
not really
that has
answering
to
the
go forward
question.
before anybody's a front runner or anybody is even
so pathetic.
The candidate for the party. And
do you
I
condemn
think
him
that,
saying
and I
something
believe,
like this?
Absolutely. And I believe, answering your question, that people certainly are going to take into consideration a statement like this as they evaluate a candidate.
I mean, Republicans are in a pretty awkward position where the guy who's still favored by many people in the base is so unhinged and keeps saying just crazy stuff that they constantly have to respond to every single time they go on these shows. Yeah,
but some are more fearless about it than others. This guy was being very cagey.
Got to be awkward to be a Republican politician right now.
Yep.
I don't envy their position. All right. Well, speaking of awkward, there's a guy named Antony Blinken who's supposed to be our Secretary of State, which I thought means like engaging in diplomacy.
You were
wrong.
That's
not but that's not what he really does for his job. He just goes around the world trying to enforce regime change and destabilization in countries that the U.S. wants to overthrow. And so one of those countries is Iran. And Iran just had this news where apparently, and I think the details are still unclear, so we don't know for sure yet, but apparently a top official suggested that Iran is going to abolish the so-called morality police in response to the protests that have erupted after the death of a young woman in custody after she was detained for not properly wearing the hijab. So Antony Blinken was asked about this apparent news that Iran is actually responding to the protests and abolishing the morality police.
Let's start with some breaking news overnight out of Iran. They have abolished the morality police. This is after months of protests following the death of Mahsa Amini, who died because she was taken into custody since her head wasn't adequately covered. Does this stop the protests that have been raging?
That's up to the Iranian people. This is about them. It's not about us. And what we've seen since the killing of Mahsa Amini has been the extraordinary courage of Iranian young people, especially women, who've been leading these protests, standing up for the right to be able to say what they want to say, wear what they want to wear. And so if the regime has now responded in some fashion to those protests, that could be a positive thing, but we have to see how it actually plays out in practice and what the Iranian people think. This is about them, and it's up to them.
Could be a positive thing.
And I think also if the government of Iran actually does respond to the protests, I think Blinken would be pretty upset because it undermines the agenda of basically using unrest to overthrow the government, which is the U.S. policy. The U.S. is actively trying to overthrow the Iranian government, so much so that the Biden administration won't even return to its own deal with Iran, which Trump killed, the Iran nuclear deal, which Trump pulled out of. Biden administration has refused to rejoin it and has stalled these negotiations to re-implement it for as long as it's been in office. And that, I think, incidents like this, like if Iran is actually responding to protesters, I think someone like Blinken will not be happy.
Right. which is why he's like, well, we'll see.
Yeah. And of course, and again, I have to say, what doesn't get mentioned in coverage of this is that, yes, there has been a women-led component of protesting here that's been peaceful and very courageous, and of course, I think is worthy of support. But there also have been violent attacks on Iranian government forces, and I don't think that has anything to do with the women that have come out against the morality police. I think that's the work of people trying to overthrow the government, and that's the aspect of this that always gets ignored when the U.S. media covers stuff like this.
All right, let's see what do we got next. We got some more foreign news we got some more Blinken.
The Biden administration did put an offer on the table when it comes to a prisoner swap with Russia. That was back in July. 2 weeks ago, you said Russia has a failure to seriously negotiate. Has that changed? Is Russia serious now?
Margaret, as you know, we did put a significant proposal on the table many months ago. And since then, we've been engaged repeatedly in any way that we can to try to advance it and to look to see if there are different permutations that could achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is to get our people home. Brittany Griner, Paul Whelan. We're engaged in that on a regular basis. And it's my determination that we bring our people home. We will not stop until we do.
But if these talks are now active and ongoing, as the White House said, that suggests you think there is some reason to believe they're serious now. You said they weren't serious a few weeks ago.
As they say, Margaret, the proof will be in the pudding. We have to see if...
God, this is that's a really awkward delivery. As they say, Margaret, the proof will be in the pudding.
Right.
I don't know. He has a strong ventriloquist vibe. That just has to be said about him. Everything.
Which is what you want in a diplomat.
Yeah, well, exactly. See, the problem is his job officially is to be a diplomat, right? Engaging in negotiations, but he just doesn't do that. Like, for example, his official policy towards Russia on ending the war in Ukraine, in the words of the Washington Post, like his mantra is "Do not engage." So
right.
You want
That's exactly what you want.
Yeah. So it's just he's in an awkward position where his job is to be a diplomat, but his function, what he does every day, is the exact opposite of that. His job is to basically keep the war going on. In fact, one of the things he's been doing as part of his job as a diplomat is going around the world begging people for weapons because they're running out of that in Ukraine. So he's gone to like a lot of countries asking them to hand over weapons to give to Ukraine because they're running in short supply. So that's what he is an arms dealer.
Yeah, he's an arms dealer. Yeah, exactly.
With a job title of diplomat. So that leads to, awkward moments like this.
He's a mob. He's a gangster, basically.
Yes, absolutely.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
The engagements that we've had, the discussions that we have, produce an actual result. That's the most important thing. But we are not resting on the laurels of having put forward a proposal some months ago. We've been actively engaged over these many months to try to move things forward.
The offer for our viewers was to release convicted arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death, Victor Bout. There are 2 Americans being held. You named them right there, Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. Brittany has been in custody for less than a year. Whelan, a former Marine, has been in captivity since 2018. Russia wants a 1-for-1 swap. How do you decide which American gets left behind?
Yeah, and so this goes on. We don't have to watch this whole thing, but basically, that is the only issue that Blinken that we know about is engaging with Russia on, is freeing these 2 Americans who are being held by Russia. And sure, we all hope that they get released, but do you think maybe you could also talk about ending
while you're at
war?
it? Yeah.
I mean, while you're negotiating for these 2 people's lives, maybe think about negotiating for millions of other people who are suffering actually far more as a result of this war. And can you do anything to work out possibly a resolution? Can you at least try? At least give it a shot. But
they're not Americans, the other ones.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
So how much are their lives really worth?
Exactly. Well, we got more. We have more Blinken because let's not just have a war with Russia over Ukraine.
Yeah.
Let's also consider one over China. Why not?
Deputy Wendy Sherman gave a speech here in
well-rounded.
Washington on Friday where she said, I think war is potentially possible because Xi Jinping now has absolute control in China. You're about to go to China. Do you agree with that assessment?
So, Margaret, we're in an intense competition with China. And, of course, there's nothing wrong with competition itself, as long as it's basically fair and on a level playing field. And we're working with countries around the world to build convergence on the approach to China, which I've seen get very strong in Europe, in Asia. And the president has a strong determination to ensure that the competition does not veer into conflict. That's one of the reasons that he spent 3 hours with Xi Jinping in Indonesia on the margins of the G20. It's one of the reasons that he asked me to go to China early next year, making sure that we're talking, we're communicating, we're making clear what we're about, what our intents are, what we're doing. That's vitally important.
But war is potentially possible, is what she said.
The determination that we have is to make sure that the competition does not veer into conflict. And this is also what the world expects of us. They expect us to responsibly manage the relationship with China. This is something that I hear from countries around the world. It's exactly what President Biden is doing, standing up strongly for our interests and values, working with other countries who are similarly situated to advance them, making sure that we're keeping the contacts open, keeping the dialogue open.
Yeah, Taiwan recently had a vote where voters actually backed the party that is, generally been closer to China, but that doesn't get mentioned in the stuff because who cares about democracy when it goes the wrong way? But yeah, and just to be clear, that was Taiwan that had that vote. If I didn't say that properly, but yeah. So but anyway, let's always think about having more wars, and it's possible we'll have another one with China, because why not?
Do you think that Margaret is excited about that, or just trying to actually get him to answer the question?
I mean, if I'm going just on, past, if we're going on lived experience, genuinely news anchors are just pretty excited about the prospect of any war.
Right.
Maybe once it breaks out, they're like, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't have advocated for that.
Right.
I didn't really think that one through, but just the possibility of it is always pretty exciting.
Right.
For news anchors.
And they love calling for a no-fly zone.
Oh, they love calling for no-fly zones. Yeah. Well, Blinken also paid a visit to Jake Tapper of CNN, who had some questions of his own.
Start with Ukraine, because it's clear that Russia is openly terrorizing the Ukrainian people with attacks not just on civilians, but on civilian infrastructure. There are many in Congress, including Speaker Pelosi, who have called on the Biden administration to label Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, I know the White House says that such a move could have unintended consequences, such as delaying food exports. But frankly, the government of Ukraine isn't buying that explanation. They say that you could avoid that with carve-outs for food and goods. Why haven't you labeled Russia a state sponsor of terrorism?
Here we go.
By the way, the issue with labeling Russia a state sponsor of terrorism is not just that it would make it even harder for Russia to import food, although that is a big deal. And already the U.S. is doing what it can to crush Russia's economy and impoverish the Russian people. But the issue is also that if you label a country a state sponsor of terrorism, you can't engage in diplomacy with them, basically. And I mean, that's dangerous for a number of reasons.
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
We don't negotiate with terrorists, exactly. And that also means, so you're talking about the two leading nuclear powers would essentially be forbidden.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so you don't really, unless you want to, help trigger a nuclear holocaust, you want to try to avoid that outcome. So that really is the main issue with labeling Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. Also, it just, you can do this to small countries that can't really fight back, like, Cuba or
which we like to do.
Venezuela or Syria. I mean, that's how the U.S. gets away with doing it there. But with Russia, was such a huge country and is such a big part of the global economy, despite the U.S.'s best efforts, you would create mayhem, or even bigger mayhem than we currently have. Yeah.
Right. I know. I love it. It's like, it's an awkward thing because they can't say, well, look, it would just be too hard for us to bully Russia around the way we bully other countries. So that's why we're not going to do it.
Yes. And so Tapper mentions that Nancy Pelosi supports making Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. Well, who else does? It's Lindsey Graham. And that's when Lindsey Graham unveiled this measure to make Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, that's when he made his famous statement that as long as we arm Ukraine, they will fight to the last person.
Right.
So that's really is what's driving is the people want to as long as we're in Ukraine, they will fight Russia to the last person. So that is really is what is driving it. Is people like Lindsey Graham who want to make it easier to fight Russia to the last person by making Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. So let's hear Blinken's response.
Jake, let's look at what's happening first. Putin tried to erase Ukraine from the map, erase its identity, subsume it back into Russia. That failed. Then he engaged in a land grab in eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine. That's been failing because the Ukrainian military has been pushing back and taking back a lot of the territory that Putin gained. Now, to your point, what he's doing is trying to weaponize winter, turn out the lights, turn off the heat, put the Ukrainian people into darkness and cold just as they head into the winter months. This is indeed barbaric. We're pushing back very strongly in our support for Ukraine, making sure that they're getting the missile defenses they need, working on getting them the different pieces for their energy infrastructure that they need as Putin tries to destroy it. As to sanctions, we have leveled unprecedented sanctions against Russia, unprecedented export controls, all of that in coordination with dozens of countries. I just got back from meetings in NATO. The solidarity among the NATO partners, the G7 partners, is very strong and resolute. So we're constantly looking at different measures that we can take to, as necessary, increase the pressure. We're working with Congress right now on legislation that would help us get around some of the challenges of using the state sponsor of terrorism designation, which, as you said, has some unintended consequences. We're working with Congress on a way forward to get to the same place.
So you
keep hope alive, everybody. Keep hope alive.
Yeah, exactly.
Blinken is finding a way to further immiserate Russian civilians. He's just working on the details. It's, it's difficult. And that's how you're allowed to be skeptical in U.S. media is when you're challenging our leaders for not being confrontational and hawkish.
Right. Not being sufficiently belligerent.
Yeah.
So scary. It's so disturbing.
Yeah.
He is annoyed. Jake Tapper's annoyed.
He's outraged. He's indignant. And look, what Blinken says there about Russia trying to weaponize winter, I think there's truth to that. Russia has recently started bombing energy infrastructure inside of Ukraine. And what, powers like Russia say, and the U.S. has said this too, is that they're bombing infrastructure because it serves a dual military purpose. So that's why they have to take it out. And I think that's basically an excuse to justify collective punishment. I do think they're deliberately targeting this infrastructure to impose hardship on Ukrainian civilians. The point that I'd try to make is that all this was predicted. A few months ago, I talk about this article a lot in the New York Times. There was that line saying that Western officials are baffled that Russia had to that point not bombed infrastructure and had avoided escalating the war. And they feared that the most dangerous moments are yet to come. That was from the Times. And they predicted that this would happen because basically the U.S. side was refusing to engage in diplomacy. And so their choice was to basically put Ukraine in a situation where stuff like this happens. And this is no different, by the way, than what the U.S. does when it goes and bombs countries like Iran.
But we do it much earlier on.
We do it much earlier, yeah. So,
but this speaks to, again, why it was so destructive to present, to over vilify Putin and make him Hitlerian, because then there was no need to negotiate. Because if he's already a Hitler who's already doing the worst of the worst, what's the point? That's their argument, right? And of course, the fact that it did get a lot worse speaks to the reality of the situation, which the United States would not recognize.
Not to absolve Russia of its criminal responsibility, because when you're imposing collective punishment, which I think it's doing, that's on Russia. But the question for U.S. policymakers is, did they do all they can to avoid the situation, and did they actually take steps to actually make sure that it happened? And I think they chose to basically discard Ukrainian lives and keep this war going, because their aim, as Lloyd Austin said, is not to defend Ukraine, but it's to weaken Russia.
Right.
To use this war to bleed Russia as much as they can.
And how much did the media aid the United States in this?
Well, by being confrontational and hawkish, like Jake Tapper is doing here, by only admonishing Blinken for not being hawkish enough.
And for picking up the Putin is Hitler.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we got more from some Republicans on the issue of Ukraine. This is Senator Joni Ernst and Angus King, Angus King is an independent, but he's pretty much a Republican. I think it's fair to say. They were on Fox News Sunday.
Has now asked for another $38 billion in this next tranche of potential spending. There are Republicans who are asking for more transparency over on the House side, especially. There's talk of a resolution there that would allow for tracking these dollars. They're taxpayer dollars. U.S. Citizens who work hard for this money want to know exactly where it's going. Congresswoman Kat Cammack out of Florida says this. I liken it to the airline videos they do before you take off. You need to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. I just don't think as a legislator that I could in good conscience support billions and billions of funding going overseas when we have such dire needs here. Does she have a point?
We can do both. We truly can. And it is important that we as members of Congress are communicating why it is so important that we're enabling freedom in other countries like Ukraine. I would put it this way. Do we want to live in a world that is dominated by Russia, China, and Iran, where they are controlling the direction of our globe? I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to see what that looks like. I think it's incredibly important that we continue to advance freedom in Ukraine.
I think
if you unless you keep a proxy war going in Ukraine that's been actually raging for 8 years and deny rights to Russian-speaking Ukrainians or ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the east of the country, then Russia, China, and Iran are going to take over the world.
Right.
That's pretty much what the message is. So we got to keep, money flowing to Raytheon for
Slava Raytheon.
Slava Raytheon. Yeah. There's more from this interview we can hear if we haven't had enough.
She has a point, and it's wrong. I would suggest she Google Rhineland 1936, Sudetenland 1938. Hitler could have been stopped at those two times when he began his aggression in Eastern Europe. He wasn't. 55 million people died. Despots want to expand. Putin has told us who he is. Maya Angelou says if someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. He wants to.
Oh, he's.
I'm glad Maya Angelou isn't around to hear this.
Famed neocon poet.
Yeah, right.
Maya Angelou. Yes.
Reestablish the Soviet Empire. He said that. I have no doubt that if he had been able to sweep into.
He didn't actually say that. He actually said he definitely feels as if, Ukraine and Russia are one and that they have a historic tie. But he's also said that, we respect Ukraine's. This is before he invaded. He said that we respect Ukraine's sovereignty. And basically his ask was that Ukraine respect the rights of ethnic Russian Ukrainians who've been fighting the government since 2014 after the U.S. backed a coup, which you can't talk about on shows like this. But unfortunately, that's what happened. But you can get away with saying stuff like this because you'll never mention that background. So,
of course,
it works well.
Kyiv in a week, which is what he thought he could do, we'd now be talking about probes into the Baltic states or Poland. He's got to be stopped. It's in the national interest to stop him. The only thing more expensive than helping Ukraine is a world war.
Where do we draw?
Yeah. So again, he couldn't like Russia sent in a bit over 100,000 troops into Ukraine, which is not enough to conquer Ukraine. And it showed because Russia suffered some major setbacks. So yet Russia couldn't even take over Ukraine, according to this narrative, that they tried. But yet somehow also Putin's also going to send troops into Poland and other NATO states. It's incoherent. Doesn't make sense.
It's so disgusting. It's so irresponsible and illogical.
Yeah, it doesn't quite compute, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter on these shows.
Ridiculous. Well, we have one more minute. Do we have time to watch another clip, or should we just transition on to Colin? Also, a lot of people have been asking about the Twitter files, which of course did not get mentioned on the Sunday morning news shows, and we'll be addressing that on the show this week. But since it's not part of the Sunday morning news shows, we're not reacting to it.
We will be refraining from any comment on the Twitter files until our next show, which comes out on Friday. No, but it's interesting. It's interesting. So Matt Taibbi, co-founder of the show, came out with a long Twitter thread based on internal documents from Twitter that he got, just detailing some of the inner workings, including how Twitter went about suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story on the fake grounds that it could be a disinformation operation by Russia. And that is a big deal. But the problem is, because these shows were complicit in that, where they basically shrugged their shoulders at an act of censorship, that didn't get covered this week. And but we'll cover it on the show this week, on Useful Idiots this week, which comes out on Friday.
Yeah. All righty. So guys, come on over to Call-In. We will see you there.
And for more content, go to usefulidiots.substack.com. And we'll see you next time.
Great. Bye all.
Bye, everybody.